Condemnation of Donald Trump's comments at a news conference in which he blamed both sides for violence in Charlottesville over the weekend. We're going to discuss this now, and I'm joined from Washington by Pete Wehner, Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And in Charlotte, Carolina, we have D.C. McAllister, a senior contributor for web magazine The Federalist. Very welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining us here at BBC News. Pete, if I can begin with you first of all, were you surprised that Donald Trump repeated what he had been criticised for in the first instance, namely comparing or drawing an equivalence between the far-right protesters in Charlottesville and those who were opposing that protest?
No, I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, Donald Trump is Donald Trump, and what you saw on Monday, when the words were more measured, looked like a hostage video. They were clearly written by aides, not him. He was clearly resistant to giving them. And what you saw yesterday was Donald Trump unplugged, and a person of deep moral confusion at best. So it didn't surprise me at all. The thing that General Kelly, the Chief of Staff, and really everybody around Donald Trump is learning something they should have learned a long, long time ago, which is this man is uncontrollable and uncontainable. He's a transgressive personality. He's a moral offense. And they can try as they might to keep him contained, but it won't work, because ultimately his dark and ugly sentiments and passions and heart come out. Let
me bring in DC. You're shaking your head when you heard Pete say this was Donald Trump unplugged, but he does have a reputation, doesn't he, the president, for his advisors telling him this is what you ought to say, but he goes off message and says his own thing very much, doesn't he?
Really doesn't matter. I'd really like to talk about his response on that he had to the event that happened. And I'd like to say it without Peter interrupting
what doesn't matter? I beg your pardon, just to be clear, what doesn't matter?
I did not interrupt him at all during his diatribe. But let me tell you, what happened. You had neo-Nazis protesting in Charlottesville, a very bad, nasty group, and we don't like them, and they're evil. Then you had another group show up called Antifa, the anti-fascist, and they've been around for decades. And they came with masks, clubs, and they violently attacked the neo-Nazis. Both very bad groups, both with a history of violence, both who have been going at each other for the last 2 decades, even back to the 1920s. We're talking about brown shirts and red shirts going after each other. So there you had 2 very violent groups. And if you know anything about the anti-fascist group, and you're honest with yourself, you know that they're everywhere. They're in Europe, they're in Germany, they're in Russia, they're in the UK. They are a violent group that say they stand for something good, but they use violent means to get across their message. It was these 2 groups that were in Charlottesville. They had nothing to do with Donald Trump. They had nothing to do with the conservatives. They had nothing to do with the GOP. They were fighting as they have been for decades. And then, so Donald Trump comes out and says, I condemn the violence of both these groups. Oh, the horror of that. Aghast. He's horrible. He condemned the violence that was actually happening with 2 groups on both sides. Then he came back and clarified who the 2 groups were. Oh, we had the alt-left, we had the alt-right, we have Marxists on one side, neo-Nazis on the other. You don't want to hear the truth.
The outrage, if I may ask you, the outrage, if I may ask you, was because it was the far-right protesters who had brought guns, who had made, denigrating comments against Jewish people, black people, one of their number who drove a car into the crowd, killing one of the protesters on the opposite side. And the outrage has come, I guess, because Donald Trump seemed to be laying the blame equally on both sides, whereas the majority of people, it does seem, are blaming the KKK, the white supremacists.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not going to let you do that. No, there are 2 groups that were fighting each other, and they are both to blame. So the neo-Nazis were saying a whole bunch of nasty stuff. Yes, we all know that they're horrible. But in America, it may not be this way in England, but in America, we have free speech. And that means you have to put up with people saying awful things.
Well, let me put that point to Pete. DC says in America, and we do have free speech here in England, of course, as well. DC says that in America, you have free speech. You have to put up with people saying awful things. What's your response to that?
Of course we have free speech. The question is who was primarily responsible for what happened. I'd say a couple of things. One thing that D.C. has not said in all of this talk about moral equivalence is she has failed to point out that the one person who died in this incident was killed by the white nationalists and the racists, but that somehow goes uncommented upon. The other thing that you have to keep in mind is that this thing was organized by the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists, and it was meant to provoke passions and hate and anger. And they got what they wanted. And the point about Donald Trump is, you know full well, and so does everybody who's defending him, that if it had been a person of the Muslim faith that had committed this crime, he would have torched them immediately. There wouldn't have been any moral equivalence at all. And this is also a man whose entire political history has been based in large part on stoking racial hatred and racial sentiment, and began really his political career with a racial lie, which was Barack Obama was not born in this country, in his birth certificate. He appealed to David Duke types during the campaign. He was morally ambiguous then, and he is now. So this is a dark moment, and to see these people on the right feel so compelled, so morally compelled to try and defend Trump and to push this argument about moral equivalence tells you how much Trump is dragging people down and destroying their moral sensibilities. It's a sad thing to see, because I think with the passage of time they'll rue the day that they did this.
DC, if I can ask you, obviously you are angry at the criticism that's being leveled against President Trump, but when senior figures, the likes of Ryan, Rubio, etc., within Donald Trump's own Republican Party are criticizing him, when the former leader of the Ku Klux Klan is praising the president's courage and honesty, in his words, to tell the truth about Charlottesville, isn't something off kilter there? Because surely the American president has to rise above all of this to be truly American, to be presidential. So if people within his own party are criticizing him, isn't he doing something wrong?
Well, number one, I'm not angry because you're criticizing the president. I'm angry because the truth is not being told here. I hear a lot of propaganda. I don't hear the truth. And that makes me angry. Sure. And number two, the people within the Republican Party have been at Donald Trump from the very beginning. So if you don't know anything about that war, then you need to go do some journalism, because there has been a war within
we've
the
reported that.
Party.
Let me tell you, we've been reporting that from the start.
Then you know that there's a never Trump crowd who despises Donald Trump, and they jump on every little thing to try to delegitimize him. So there is this war going on within the Republican Party. So it should not surprise you that some Republicans come out and condemn him. Number two, also Republicans are scared to death of being labeled a racist. And right now, anyone, and I can tell you, when I get off this program, I'll be called a racist sympathizer or a neo-Nazi, because I'm trying to get to the truth about two different violent sides that clashed in Charlottesville. That's all I'm doing right here. And I'm going to be called a racist for it. And Republicans don't want to be called that. So they're going to run as far away from it as possible. That's what you see going on with the Republicans. As far as David Duke or the KKK saying we love what the president says, well, Hillary Clinton was praised by jihadists who blew up Orlando. Is she responsible for that, for the fact that that man wanted to vote for her? Okay. The Black Panthers supported Barack Obama. Is he
Let me allow Pete to come in response. Let me allow Pete to come in response to that, and then I'll come back to you, DC. Pete?
Yeah, the reason that David Duke and Richard Spencer and all the white nationalists are thrilled with what Donald Trump said is because they got what they wanted, which was they've been emboldened and they've been helped, and they know it. And Donald Trump knows it. And as I said, this is going on within a particular context, which is Donald Trump has been stoking the embers of racism and nativism throughout his campaign. This isn't hard. You've got the white nationalists thrilled with Trump. You have Republicans who have an investment in Donald Trump succeeding, criticizing him. And all you have is this small pocket of people, for reasons that are hard to discern, who feel compelled to defend Trump and to keep making this moral equivalence argument. And the moral equivalence argument is a moral offense. In this particular case, given all the facts and circumstances, and given who are the people who killed the innocent woman, which again, the Trump supporters just seem very resistant and reluctant to mention, It tells you the state of the American right. It's not a pretty sight.
I just want to let both of you hear a statement which has just come in from former presidents George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, and they say this: America must always reject racial bigotry, anti-Semitism and hatred in all forms. As we pray for Charlottesville, we are reminded of the fundamental truths recorded by that city's most prominent citizen in the Declaration of Independence. We are all created equal and endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. We know these truths to be everlasting because we have seen the decency and greatness of our country. It's pretty unusual, isn't it, to have not one but two former presidents, DC, come in and make a statement about a situation in Charlottesville. It seems to be in contrast, I think it's fair to say, to the sort of statements that Donald Trump has been making, in which he has accused, once again, the news media of peddling fake reports.
It is not unusual for these two presidents to come out and speak out against Donald Trump because they did so during the election, which was highly unusual at the time too. There is a war within the Republican Party. It's continuing. It is not to the advantage of many Republicans that Donald Trump succeeds. They don't want him to succeed any more than the Democrats do.
Surely they do.
There
because
is that.
If I can just ask you on that point, if I may ask you on that point, you know, they've got a Republican president in the White House. They've got control of both houses of Congress. Surely, actually, they do want him to succeed because they want Republican laws to get through Congress. But that's not happening. And isn't the common factor there Donald Trump?
I think you're not understanding the two factions within the Republican Party that have been at war with each other before Donald Trump came into office, back to the Tea Party. So you need to really understand that war to understand what the Republicans are doing right now. You also need to understand, and you're not speaking at all about Antifa, the opposing group here, and I don't understand why not. Why aren't you speaking about the anti-fascists and the anarchists that were attacking? George Bush just spoke there about our Constitution and the freedoms of America, and that we should have a moral high ground. And part of that is free speech. Part of that is not bowing to a totalitarian regime, which is what the counter-protesters represent. And they've been doing it for years, and they've been fighting for years, even before Donald Trump came onto the scene. So explain that to me. How is it that these two groups have been fighting, even before Donald Trump came onto the scene, yet this is Donald Trump's fault? Okay, he stands up for border control, immigration reform, and upholding our immigration laws, yet he's been called a racist for that. And so the nationalists clam onto him because they hated Barack Obama. But, if there was so much encouragement for Donald Trump for these neo-Nazis, why were they protesting in the first place in Charlottesville? Why didn't we see this going on during Barack Obama's 8 years? I mean, wouldn't it have been logical if there's this horrible seed of racism going on in America that this would have been going on all the time?
Well, let me put that to Pete Wehner. Pete, do you think that President Trump's presidency is emboldening white supremacy? And do you think at this point that we're going to see more of a push from the branch of the Republican Party, which DC says has been out to get him from the start, to actually remove him from office?
Of course the white supremacists have been emboldened. That's in black and white. It's on Twitter. That's undeniable. And they've been emboldened because they have every right to have been emboldened. They have a president who is a moral fraud and a moral shame, giving them support. In terms of whether the Republican Party will get rid of Donald Trump, not unless there's absolutely compelling evidence to do so, meaning the Mueller investigation, and there may well be, but we'll have to let that investigation go forward. But I do want to come back to the statement that George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush made. DC is factually wrong. She has been on a number of things here, but George W. Bush didn't speak out against Donald Trump during the campaign. In fact, what he's been noted for is for being quiet, both with Obama and with Donald Trump. So for these two men to issue this statement does tell you something, and what it tells you is this is what decent and honorable and impressive presidents and human beings say at a moment like this, and that is in contradistinction to Donald Trump. Both George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, and I worked in the administration of 41 and in the White House at 43, are good and impressive and honorable men, and I wish that we had a person in the White House today that was like that, but we don't, and so we're going to have to make our way through this difficult and ugly moment.
I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it there, but Pete Wehner from the Ethics and Public Policy Centre and DC McAllister, senior contributor to the